There we go. We have sound. All right, welcome to Easier Habits Live. These are generally live strategy sessions with me and my wife, who is an executive communication coach, not couch, as I accidentally spelled it a couple of times. And we had some laughs about that. However, my wife is out of town at a conference or an expo that we helped prepare her for on the stream. So now I have to fill the gaping void that is her absence. And I had a brilliant idea. I get to do that by showing you behind the curtain a little bit, and we're going to fill her absence by talking about her, right? I am going to analyze the context, the coaching progress that we've made on the live stream, as well as evaluate my own wife as a client, basically showing you how coaches think behind the scenes. Now, none of this is going to be like that I'm keeping secrets from Meg. It's more going to be, all right, what's my framework for the things that I tell her? And so like, it just doesn't get brought up in this way. I don't always like talk about my reasoning behind the things. And then also there's things that are just not relevant. Like it doesn't help Meg what I think of her as a client necessarily, right? Unless like there were some huge issue, like she doesn't show up in terms of like, she just ditches me or whatever. That would be the kind of thing I'd have to talk with a client about. But most of the times, the thoughts about clients aren't these super secret things or whatever. I'm thinking double thoughts or weird things about my clients. It's just more of like, this is stuff that's helpful for me in figuring out how to help, like, best organize sessions and how to talk to her, but it's not stuff that she needs to think about because it's not stuff that helps her build her business. So, but we normally have a communication tip and a business tip to bookend these live sessions. And so I'm going to also have to fill in for Meg on the communication tip. And actually, I think I'm going to marry the two, and I'm going to talk about just a couple of insights that I've had in my own journey about how to find my voice, how to be authentic, right? Because there's a lot of successful people that talk about how you kind of just have to be yourself. It's kind of like that old dating advice. And it's just confusing and it's hard to figure out. And I have to admit, like, I am in the process of figuring out, but there's like a few signposts I have discovered. So I'll give you one tip now and one tip at the end of this live stream. So one signpost that I have discovered with speaking authentically is how it affects your brain or your mood, right? Basically, you get into flow when you are being authentic to yourself, right? It sparks your imagination. You have a desire to practice. You're excited. You're into it. You're not thinking about external things. You're not thinking about what other people are going to think about you as much. Although you might be thinking how excited you are to share a cool idea with them, right? You're not thinking about their judgment of you or their delivery of the product as much as how to best communicate the idea to them, right? You're not thinking about time as much and other external factors. It's kind of flow. There's this excitement. There's a challenge, right? It's not something that's easy for you. It's not something that's so hard you don't know where to start, right? All of that are descriptors of flow. There's a book about that you can read by author with a long last name, Csikszentmihalyi. So you could, so that being authentically yourself, communicating authentically involves flow. And in this case, I'm not just talking about like an instance, but like when you are telling your story to the world, whether that's marketing, whether that's pitching people, whether that's sales, whatever, and you're being authentic, there will be times of flow. If it's just a grind all the time, then that's a sign that you may be trying something that really doesn't work for you. And you can try it. You might learn important things. There are valuable lessons to be learned from stepping outside your comfort zone and who you authentically are. But generally speaking, your authentic voice will come with excitement, with energy, with focus, and a focus specifically on how to best communicate that message to other people, and less about, are they going to buy my product as a result of this, or what are they going to think about me, right? And that will allow you to take risks that other people won't take. That will allow you to focus on the quality of your product, much better into product in terms of whatever communication it is, right? Focus on the quality of that communication much better than someone who's constantly worried about being judged. So, this is really a couple explanations around this is that a couple caveats around this is really a matter of ratios, right? So there's a certain amount of grind that you're gonna have. You might be excited to pitch yourself in a new way, but like actually wordsmithing that and putting that up on your website. I periodically do this, change the copy on my website. Still probably not 100% happy with it. Like that is a grind set of things. But like these videos, having live videos, etc., they tend to be a lot closer to my personal voice. And even if I say those same things, but like translate it, like I have to have a website, right? Where people can look me up. And so like that is kind of a grind. Although, one of the things I've been thinking about, since video feels a lot more authentic to me and being able to talk naturally feels more authentic to me, I should incorporate that a lot more on my website, right? So it's leaning into my authentic side, but there is some grind. There's some things you are going to have to do that just aren't a bullseye in the target that is your authentic voice and your flow, right? But it's a matter of ratio. So if you are finding that like once every few months there's something you're briefly excited about, that's probably a pretty good sign that you're not being authentic. You haven't really found your voice in who you are. At the same time, like if you are connecting with that multiple times a week, especially, I think you're probably doing it as well as anybody can. If you can connect with it daily, you are doing fantastically. But it's not necessarily walking around in a state of unending bliss where everything's easy. But it's a matter of ratio. And to give you an example, right, these live streams, especially with my wife, like conversation is definitely, and like personal connection is a part of my authentic voice. I have tried and I'll get into that story maybe a little bit later another time. I've tried like cold email, like doing automated emails based on like surefire templates by, master marketers, etc. And it did nothing for me. And I'm not that surprised, right? You pretty much expect everything in your business, you do in business, to fail the first time until you get all the variables right. But what I noticed is, I was fine trying it out. A lot of people say, if you say you have a hard time with like marketing or cold emails or cold outreach, they assume it's because you're like afraid of it. I'm like, I'm not afraid of it. It just didn't spark my imagination. Reaching out to a bunch of strangers, even strangers who might need a particular service or product that I was offering, and trying to sell them, it doesn't catch my imagination. Now there's some people who are like born salesmen, for example, for whom that particular challenge, like how do I get someone who's not even thinking about me to buy my product, maybe that lights them up and they love figuring out how to craft different, experimenting with different subject lines to get someone's attention, that's just not me. Whereas something like this, a much more open-ended medium, is something that does get my imagination flowing. I think of all sorts of things that I could say, and so that is an example of just, there are inauthentic channels, there are authentic channels. You should try things that are outside of your comfort zone, but you should always come back to the channels that get your imagination going, because at the end of the day, those are the things you're going to practice more and get better at, and that practicing them and getting better at them will improve your quality of life versus things that you just have to exercise discipline all day, every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, like grind sort of stuff. Like just don't do that. Chances of you, unless you're crazy, unless you have a very obsessive personality, I think is probably a better way of saying that, it's really not going to work for you. Like that style of like trying to grind to success purely without finding your authentic voice. So look for those feelings of flow and the focus on enjoying the communication, crafting the communication, losing track of external concerns like time and what other people are thinking about you. Look for that and follow that as a guidepost. And, it's a ratio, not a constant state of bliss. If you're finding that regularly, you're on the right track. If you're going weeks without it, you're probably missing something. So That was a very long tip. So a communication tip. But let's get into our coaching sessions. And for me, one of the big purposes of a coach is to help you see the big picture. Because what a lot of people get lost in is seeing their day-to-day activities. And especially like this is one of the things also that I'm just good at. I naturally like to do. And by inclination, this is part of my flow, right? I'm a big picture thinker. Which means, well, I pair very well with people who love implementing, love keeping busy, but they're feeling like they're burnt out because they don't know what to work on and they have a hard time like prioritizing and seeing the big picture, right? So that is like a particularly good space for a coach. And my wife is definitely one of those people who likes to have some structure provided for her, given to her. She's very detail oriented and really good at implementation and follow through if she has a clear framework to work with. So that is one of the big roles that I'm going to first think about is, all right, like what's the big picture? And the big picture for Meg is where she's at in business. There's several stages, right? The first stage of building a business is just figuring out even what you want to do. I typically don't work with people who are in that situation, right? I usually work with people who already have businesses and already have some cash flow. But a second stage of business, again, this is probably pre-coaching, would be you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, but you haven't had any major successes or like one or two. And I don't think Meg's here. She's had a lot of different successes in a lot of different areas. Meg's in kind of a third phase where she's had some successes, but she can't reproduce them consistently. She doesn't have basically a client acquisition model or a customer acquisition model. So that is the broad phase she's focused on. Within that, there's a couple of different kind of smaller sub issues, right? One could be niche. So some people have a hard time building out a customer acquisition model because they don't even know what customers they're going after. They haven't niched down. Meg is definitely niched down. We got to a very specific user avatar, which she was able to do because she already knew a lot of details like, I want to work with entrepreneurs and specifically Japanese entrepreneurs looking, in the area of language and helping them access a global market, right? That's already starting to niche down. And then we teased out some other likely variables in our user avatar video. So niching isn't really the issue here. She has a niche, and so it is reliably reaching that niche. And that's the challenge. And so she has definitely hit that or hit very similar clients to that several times, but she doesn't have a full schedule of that kind of client. So that's really the goal and how we're prioritizing things. And the challenge here in this stage, I think one of the things that throws people, it's really difficult, is so ideally you would want to just take your successes and scale them, right? Like, all right, what are you doing that's worked? How have you gotten clients in the past? Let's do more of that, right? But the challenge is, especially when you're starting out, you don't know whether often that opportunity is can scale, right? You might actually be at what they call in artificial intelligence a local maxima, right? When you're searching for the optimal solution, and if you imagine it as like a wavy graph, there's going to be some bumps that are higher and some bumps that are, some bumps that are way up here and some, and some big valleys and then some low bumps, right? And so when you're optimizing something, by just trying to move in a direction where you get more results, sometimes you hit a local maxima, which is the highest point you can get by optimizing. And it doesn't mean you're at the highest point in the graph. There may be a bump over here that's higher, but you can't get to this bump without actually don't optimize. You actually have to do suboptimal things, go down into the, try something else, like scrap what you're doing, go down into those valleys, and then try and optimize a new route to see if there's something that allows you to do more. So, all right, if you've kind of got that picture, that mental picture, then the challenge is like, all right, so Meg has gotten a couple clients, for example, from an online group. So is that a scalable strategy? Well, like on a high level, no, right? We did the calculation where it's like, all right, so if it has taken you X thousands of people in a group to get a couple clients, you would have to find this many groups and spend, I forget what it was, but like 5 or 7, right? We'd have to find, 5 to 7 similar groups and be putting just as much effort in it if you're just simply like ramping up what you're doing right now on scale. And so the question that we have for Meg's business, like the biggest question, the big picture question that's going to help us get into the details, really is her method of contacting people via like entrepreneur groups online, is there a more scalable way of doing that? Or are we tapped out? Like, are we in the wrong place entirely? And so this is kind of getting into the specifics. Like, all right, what have we done? So one of the things we did is to find multiple groups. Now, she can't take the same thing she's doing and just apply, multiply her time 7 times. It works 7 times as much. She doesn't have enough time in the day to work 7 times as much, right? So we have to think differently. But now that we have like several groups, we can try this repeatedly to see what works. We can up our range of experimentation. And if we find consistently that whatever we try only yields like 1 customer per, 3,000 people, I think that was in a group, per year of effort, or like 2 customers per year of effort per 3,000 people in the group or something like that, that's just not a sustainable model. And it just might be the way that we're trying to reach out, like the services that she's offering to attract people's attention aren't working out, or the groups themselves aren't working out, right? And we have to try something completely different. So that's kind of the balance. This is kind of like a big map. This is a really good exercise for me. How can I say this more simply? Because that was not simple. So like basically the big problem before Meg, right, is whether she needs a big optimization in like completely change what she's doing, right? Go to a completely different venue, offer completely different lead magnets, services, engagement models, like scraps, try something else, or whether her current approach can be tweaked via small means, right? Could she just find ways to advertise her services more? She said, for example, in one of the past sessions that we did, that there were some Japanese people who asked her if it would be okay if she did coaching, and if it would be okay for them to be coached. Like, they should know. Everyone should know that she coaches people for money. Like, that shouldn't even be a question, right? And so there's probably some low-hanging fruit there in just being able to casually drop in, hey, I coach people on this type of thing, for money one-on-one. If you're interested, you can ask me, right? And you don't even have to constantly be saying that last part, right? But people should know, like, hey, I coach people. And this doesn't have to be like you advertising your services, right? This could be how you talk about, I have this client who had I'm working now with a client who has a similar problem. Like, we're working on this goal, and here's one of the things we're practicing, right? That's you giving free content, a free tip that you use in your coaching to other people, but also underscoring, right, the fact that you're a coach. So that would be kind of like a micro optimization. She doesn't have to uproot her whole strategy, but if she did more of that in the group, then maybe she would get more clients, because there'd be people who are interested in coaching that would actually feel comfortable coming to her because they know that's what she does, right? That she's open to that. So rather than, I think what it sounds like she's been doing quite a bit is just offering free English lessons without even letting people know like that she actually gets paid to do that one-on-one. And so, yeah, and it's an interesting circumstance, because she joined that group originally not for business purposes, and so she's very worried about ruining friendships or being too spammy. And I think, right now, this is kind of getting into more specific assessments. One of her challenges is to be comfortable, like, being an executive communication coach. Not to have to advertise it, but to like be comfortable saying like that's what she is, and to and to integrate that with other areas of her life, right? Like telling stories, not necessarily like private stories or whatever, but like carefully anonymized stories or stories that she asked for permission with, sharing those with other people from her practice. And so that like when people see her, they think communication coach, right? And that's a very tricky thing, I think, when people are starting a new business. They're not, a lot of imposter syndrome. They're not comfortable saying like, hey, I'm a coach. This is what I do. This is the kind of thing I'm interested in, telling stories from that life. Like it's not a part of their lives, where as someone who's an expert, like all of their stories have to do with, all the, awesome experiences they had in their career. Right. And so like, that's one of the differences between how an expert presents versus someone who's new. And you could be expert in terms of skill, but new to the business. And because of that, you're not really portraying yourself in the same way. It's a little bit of a tangent, but like that's one of the biggest issues that I'm seeing, like given that she's not getting the number of results that she wants in her business, that it's really like this core part. Like she doesn't really embody being the communication coach. And man, as I'm saying this, like I'm realizing like, this applies to me too in all sorts of ways. There's all sorts of ways where, I've been hesitant to just jump in like, hey, I'm a business coach. This is what I do all the time. Can I help you out? I've been doing that a lot more lately with people. For instance, if I know someone who wanted to start a board game and, I don't know if it's going to be a good business or not, but like if you're going to put your money on first-time board game producers in, running Kickstarters, it's like probably not a high proportion of success, and certainly not like usually doesn't catapult them to like full-time income. But it's a good product. It's a good way to like, dip your feet into entrepreneurship, right? And so like giving a few pointers there just because like, hey, this is what I do. And then, hopefully down the line, people pay it forward and mention like, hey, I know this guy who, does business coaching. He gave me a few tips and they were great. Maybe you should check him out. Right. So yeah, we're thinking about like, do we need to scrap the approach or can we optimize what she has? We're trying to optimize what she has first. Because, you can see the low-hanging fruit there. There's a lot of room to optimize. But for example, if we were, Meg were to be much more open about being a coach, if she were going to change up some of the ways she invites people to engage with her. We talked about, for example, instead of trying to sell people who don't know anything about you or just kind of know you and then sell them on your services, right? Upsell people a little bit at a time, right? Invite them to their email list and in their email list sell your services, etc. as kind of a model for helping people move towards engagement rather than kind of an all or nothing situation that feels really challenging, especially for early business owners and business owners that are less comfortable with sales. So for example, if she introduces that model and she's not getting people on the email list, etc., and it's not just happening in one group, right? Because we found multiple groups for her, but this is happening repeatedly. Then we kind of rule out like this approach isn't working. Maybe we need to try something drastically different. Maybe what she needs to do rather than these online groups is go in person to various meetups around the city, meet people in person. And that's a huge thing for coaching, I think, that a lot of people find coaches by word of mouth or by running into them and interacting with them personally, because that's what builds, like, it takes a lot of trust. That's what builds a lot of trust. A lot of people don't even like the idea of like sitting down for a free, like most coaches will offer like a free initial coaching session or free get to know you session or strategy session, whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, right? But like even that seems stressful and intimidating for a lot of people who don't know you personally, right? So there might be a completely different tack if this didn't pay out. So that's kind of the big picture. We're trying to figure out if the successes she's had with this group are scalable if she changed some of the micro strategies, right? The presenting herself as an executive communication coach, the inviting people to engage a little bit more, like having more, a kind of a funnel and engagement plan. where it's like, all right, you post to get people familiar with you. You invite people who are familiar with you to join your email list, especially with some kind of lead magnet, right? Where you're still primarily giving them value. And then, they sign up for your email list to get that white paper where you put helpful tips out on your email list. And so you're giving a lot of value, but then you invite them, people who are ready to take the next step to buy a product, buy a service, etc. So those are kind of the two main strategies that we have been focused on. And we kind of got to the point right now in the specific coaching session where we have a plan. And actually, before Meg left, she's so busy. She said, these sessions are helping me so much. And she mentioned in communication tip number, I don't know what, like the importance of feedback. I should have just jumped on that and said, how are they helping you? Let me know, right? But I have the feeling, right, from interacting with her, and I'll have to validate this, see if my coaching instincts are correct, that basically she was trying a whole bunch of things and was lost in the weeds. She didn't know how to present herself, and she was doing each presentation or each thing she creates online as like a one-off, how can I do this thing, versus part of a content strategy or a marketing strategy. And what is different now is she realizes she has a strategy, right? She has a specific avatar that she's talking to. That avatar has specific problems. And she's addressing those problems specifically in a way to invite people to engage a little bit more, to get to know her, to, join her email list, to take her services, right? And so like that whole strategy is probably what's different and will probably enable a lot of action. What we have in front of us is really a time to implement those things and test them. And so probably the next several sessions will be her trying out like which pain points is she addressing, which problems is she addressing, how is she addressing them, and are they getting people to sign up for her email list? Are people from her email list, as it grows, eventually signing up for her services, products and services? So yeah, that's so it's a lot of practice. And one of the big important things that is on my mind for future sessions would be just scale, right? So when you get like thinking through the theory and getting the framework feels nice. It feels like an aha moment. Now I know what to do. But for most entrepreneurs, especially if they don't have like an accountability partner, coach, or like prior experience in something else, right? They build this big model, they try it like 10 times or even 100 times, and they don't see the results that they want. And so they spend a ton of time building a new model. And I totally am tempted to do this. I love building models. I love the thinking. But what you really need at this certain point is more action than thinking. And so you don't actually want to be reinventing the model a lot. You want to give this 1,000 tries, 10,000 tries, right? Rather than 10 or 100 tries. And so that's what we're looking for going forward. And so some of what we're going to be talking about is like the specific topics, the content models, the specific invites that we give. But a lot of it will also just be some productivity. How do we enable you to try this out and get more responses? That's actually a little bit behind. So in last session, one of the things that we talked about when she felt uncomfortable pitching her services, I encouraged Meg to go for the no, right? Asks, like, your whole goal in pitching your services is to get a no. And, part of that is like reverse psychology, take the pressure off. Take the pressure off of having to get a yes, and actually you might do much better and get more yeses because you feel less needy, because the interaction feels smoother, because you're more comfortable and you ask more. But really the other thing that I would say is, like, even though 1,000 no's at this point would give you no money, and one yes would give you money, for a lot of entrepreneurs, I would actually say the learning you get from getting 1,000 no's is more valuable than getting a single yes, right? Just in terms of having tried things out. If you're actually reflecting on what you're doing, if you're just going on an autopilot and learning nothing, of course, it's not helpful. But like the sheer comfort, for example, in learning how to present yourself as, an executive communication coach and not, project the neediness, like that alone could be worth many yeses in the future. And so that's, one way in which 1,000 no's is better than one yes. And so what else? Talking to people, having talked to 1,000 people, heard their pain points and heard what does or does not resonate with them. That learning, from 1,000 people is worth more than a yes from one person and not knowing exactly why they said yes. What else? There's a lot of different ways in which, like, actually, what's coming next is just volume, right? You have an idea of who you're going after, you know who you are, what you're offering, and you just need to try, 1,000 different messages, or 10 messages 100 times, probably better. But anyway, so that's kind of where I see coaching headed. And kind of the value. So the value has been laying out this action that hopefully enables her to craft a ton of messages and to reach out to a ton of people, right? Like that is the proper framework. That is the proper purpose of this kind of framework, this conceptual framework that we've been building with an avatar, with like, who are you? What's your pitch for yourself? What is your, how do you invite people to engage? Like the purpose of all of that is actually really to support the next part in making it easy to craft a message. So what Meg has been doing before, I assume, I'm not looking over her shoulder, is crafting every message as a one-off. And now she has a list and she can just like pick a topic, pick like a purpose, right? This is a post, this is a lead magnet, this is a sales pitch, right? And then pick a take on either of those, right? Within that, there's like subcategories, right? So like she now has a mechanism to generate content quickly. And she now has several groups where she can post content. And what this has all been leading up to is to help her do that as much as possible and help her scale that. So that is kind of where we've been and where we're headed. Now to talk a little bit about my very own dear wife as a client. So one of the things that, came to mind just off the cuff that made me chuckle a little bit is like, of course she's not a good client. She doesn't pay me, right? You have that kind of, she is a free client. But actually, as I thought about that, right, like, evaluating like how my client by how much she pays me, actually, it is easier to get a paid client for me than to have somebody who will come on a live stream with me and do a non-anonymous, like straight up honest business strategy session with me. And so being able to show people what I do really is invaluable. And that is actually probably something that will be worth several clients worth of money. So actually from that perspective, from like an investment perspective, it's a really good, she's a really great client. But the other things, I look for, some of them are basic. Like, does she show up show up regularly? And yes, she does. We're still figuring out this live stream. So it's kind of been bumpy and, today I was a few minutes late, etc. But Meg's pretty on top of things. So, she shows up consistently. She lets me know when she's not going to be available, right? How she's told me all the days she'll be out for conference. So like if it sounds basic, but like if that's not happening, if it's hard for someone to like, with most coaching clients, it's like every week. If it's hard for them to meet consistently every week and they want to move the schedule a lot, like I do for clients, around vacation times or just travel or other things, I do move sessions. It's okay to move a session, but like if it's constantly moving, or sometimes if someone wants to move and I have a crazy week, I'm like, I'm going to be honest, I'm not gonna, like, we'll just have to take, the next week off, give you a refund, whatever, since you told me in advance, versus like, not only potentially forgetting or like mismanaging my time in the new time slot, but like, having that throw off other meetings that I have. So, just being able to show up consistently is one of the things that I look for in a client. Another is like the specificity of goals. One of the reasons why I'm able to help Meg and why I think she's a good client is she really knows what she wants. It's always been around teaching language and especially a love of Japan, although she's worked, with plenty of Chinese people and quite enjoyed that as well. But she has it's like a very specific notion. She's been doing language teaching for decades and then has honed in more on like, I want to work with established people, entrepreneurs who and I want to work not just in language teaching, but like actually coaching them, not just like teaching them the grammar of English, but teaching them how to meet their goals with English, right? So she has really honed what she wants to a specific degree. I tried because, I got one referral from someone who said, oh, I want to be like these other people who seem to have direction. They seem to be satisfied with what they're doing, right? She didn't really have a goal of her own. And, I tried to make that work. I probably just should have said no, but like I tried to make that work and then I was like ghosted after one session. And so I just refunded that session because, clearly it wasn't a good match. But yeah, I need to work with someone that has a goal. And I've had another client who I helped sell a company. And, to be honest, the hardest part of that was kind of the figuring out, was that what this client wanted to do? But this client didn't know what they wanted to do next. And I'm like, look, I want to make sure these sessions are valuable. I love talking to you every week. And I want to talk to you again, but I also want to make sure like this is valuable. Like I'm making the best of your time. And so like we need some sort of goal to work towards. So like maybe take a break, take a well-earned vacation from a success, celebrate that, figure out what's next for you, and then come back, right? And that's totally fine. But I generally, like, that's another big thing that I look for is, does this person actually have a specific goal? And then the third thing would just be, do they follow up, right? The other reason why I might drop a client would be like I give them steps to do. I identify next steps, or ideally, actually, I say, what do we do next? And they kind of either generate those next steps themselves, or we work together on that. Right? Is the ideal coaching space. So, but do they follow up? And inevitably, you will have weeks, and this is part of the coaching process, where you don't, and that's okay. We look back and figure out, well, why didn't this work out? Sometimes it's because they weren't the right steps, and that's one of the reasons why I try and help people generate their own steps. Because there's more learning and there's less me trying to be a psychic reader and trying to get it right. Like sometimes I will have some insight, like you should do this. I will lean on people to journal because I feel like that is a powerful tool people don't use as much, right? And so I will push people in that direction a little bit. I encourage people, lead people in that direction a little bit, for example. But sometimes, despite whatever best efforts, you realize like that seemed like a good approach for the client. They were excited about it, but like it actually doesn't resonate. And so you were trying the wrong thing. And then on a week where, another thing might be wrong is just other stuff got in the way that we didn't plan or prepare for. Are there a lot of issues at home? Are there conflicts in the workplace? Are your own exercise, sleeping, and wellness habits kind of at a low point where your tiredness is preventing you from having the level of productivity you'd like to see, right? So we can troubleshoot that. That's fine. It's not like I'm perfect every week. It's not that the people I work with are perfect every week. But generally speaking, a good client is someone who, most weeks is following up on what you did. And even in the weeks, where it didn't pan out like you guys might have wanted to, they might say, I tried this and this thing got in the way, or this happened, or I just realized like this isn't the direction I want to go. Right. And so Meg definitely, to bring this back to that conversation, Meg has been taking action. I found some groups that she could use. She found additional groups, right? I We talked about creating a content plan and a pitch for like how she was going to talk to people and engage people at the expo and invite them to engage with her. So she had something at that next session. And I was able to refine that. Like, all right, could we do that simpler? Could we lead with the value to the person you're talking to, etc., right? Because she had done her preparation. And like, a special kudos to Meg. I usually have weekly sessions. People have a whole week to get their stuff done, whereas Meg is responding to our daily session, strategy sessions every day. And so actually that's like, daily progress is gold. So she is a good client from that perspective. So I've kind of given Meg glowing reviews, and I'm super biased because she's my wife. But on the other hand, that's also part of the reason why we're doing the strategy sessions, is because we work well together. So it's not a huge surprise. I'm gonna try and like lean back, like, all right, is there anything where I could rock the boat, where I could really challenge, like, is Meg a bad client in some areas? I mean, like any coach, like, I would want her to recommend my services, but like, she kind of also does that, right? She says nice things about me on air, like, this was really helpful. She shares these videos. So like, yeah, she essentially is like referring people to me in that respect. Come on, be critical. And to be honest, I guess I would have to say, there are people who don't work out. I generally find that pretty quick, and I generally try and be very upfront. But as a coach, this is kind of what I find, and one of the reasons why people like me as a coach is like, I'm in their corner. I'm cheering for them all the way. Like, it's easy for me to be critical of their work process and help them improve their work process. It's really hard for me to be critical of them as a person. I am rooting for them 100%, and a lot of people just need that. A lot of people that I talk to are people who don't have a reliable partner. And in Meg's case, right, like, she's a solopreneur. That makes sense. There's other people I talk to who are C-suite people at companies that have challenges with people at work or other executives, right? And they need somebody like an outside perspective to talk about. There are bosses of companies who, have, other co-founders who are checked out. And a lot of these people just don't have someone in their corner who is encouraging in a meaningful way, right? You can have a parent or a friend who's like, yes, you should business harder, go business, be the entrepreneur, be a girl boss, like whatever, but that's not really helpful. But having someone who you can honestly talk to about your business, including your business failures, who is 100% in your corner and helping you, take all of those obstacles and all that discouragement that comes with obstacles, and like channel that energy in a positive way, in an encouraging way, and where you feel like, they're at your back. Like, that's a big reason why people do coaching, above and beyond the, wanting the intellectual help building the conceptual framework or help staying accountable for action. It's that like, it's that like kind of in a boxing match, right? It feels like a boxing match being an entrepreneur, like you're getting your face punched all the time by all the things you hoped would work, like all the disappointments, the things you hoped would work and that don't, because it just takes a long time to learn. And like the difference feeling like you're in that fight alone versus like there is someone in your corner that like every week you're coming back to towel you off, offer you some water, give you encouragement, get you back in the ring. That is a big part of coaching. And so, I wanted to do some kind of dig at Meg. I'm not really dig at Meg. I wanted to say something critical or challenging, right? And I just having a hard time doing it because I think she's working the process great. And I wouldn't be doing this. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, I'm never going to have somebody that I'm coaching that I hate talking to. And that, I'm not engaged in what they're doing. And so, If that happened, I would just tell them like, hey, I don't think this is a good fit. We should stop. Usually I'll catch that early enough. It's only a few sessions and it'll give you like a full refund. I am ruthlessly critical in thinking about like how someone can do things better. I am really accepting of anybody who's has a goal and is making the effort, like putting the daily effort in to improve. I am excited for that person. I'm encouraged, like, as long as you're doing that, really, that you have a goal, you're putting the time in, and you're taking the time to reflect, which is essentially what a coaching session is. It's a forced time to reflect. You'll get there eventually. You'll keep improving. So this has been a long one. I noticed that, when I talk with Meg, it's shorter because I am long-winded, and she is the communication coach, is someone who's really good at keeping things shorter and more simple. So she kind of keeps me on track. But I promised you an ending tip about authentic communication. And the other thing I'm learning about authentic communication after, I guess YouTube recently said it was like an anniversary of my YouTube channel. I don't know if it's like the first or second year, to be honest. Feels like it's been more than a year. So I've been engaged in that, or, writing on my blog for, before I was trying to write on my blog for a few years. So I've been developing my coach voice for a while. And I still feel like I am early in this journey. But the other thing I've noticed is that being authentic is as much about what you're not as what you are, right? Because there's a lot of people who want to think like, hey, I'm supportive, I'm encouraging, I'm insightful, I'm critical, I'm all the things. And when you're all the things, you're none of the things. What you really want is to, in fact, being authentic is often about what you're not more than what you are. You should be like 1 to 3 things primarily. You should not be everything else as much as you can. You shouldn't be any of those other things, right? And so like the stuff that you exclude actually should be a lot bigger than the stuff that you are. You should be focused on just a few things and being authentic. I remember going into I was taking crisis counseling training, and the person running the course gave me these words which like both kind of haunted me and encouraged me. And I'm trying to specifically remember the 3 values he said. He said I had a lot of innocent, friendly, and it was like basically innocent, friendly, and intelligent, like boy next door sort of vibes. And at that time I was like in, I guess, my early to mid 20s, probably mid 20s. And, I was invested in being, finding a mate and being masculine. I'm like, innocent and friendly. Sounds like the friend zone. I was trying to, figure out who I was. And that just didn't really seem very manly. Of course I was in a rape crisis counseling center. I was going to be on the male line, and I was surrounded by women. So like I was very much like, not necessarily trying to maximize my masculine energy per se. I was engaged in a different pursuit. But it was just interesting. And so like at the one point, like when he said those things, I had a lot of pretensions of like who I wanted to be. I wanted to be masculine. I wanted to be, like more traditionally masculine. And like there was a little bit of pain of realizing like, yeah, I'm just never going to come off as a more traditionally masculine guy. I talk too much. That's one thing. That innocent energy is not a bad thing. I am an idealist, right? I am constantly trying to help people bridge the gap between where their lives are and their ideals. And my ability to kind of I don't live only in that ideal space, right? But like I think a lot of that innocence comes from the fact of like I bring a lot of hope and enthusiasm and idealism to these interactions. Because I'm using them to leverage people to move from like the daily repetition, the daily grind to closer to where they want to be. And so like that is an asset, even if, that doesn't match with a certain world weary, cynical way of looking at the world that, feels gritty and deeply manly. Like it's not who I am, right? And that the being smart, I've always I've always realized I intellectualize things a lot. I've always like been somewhat uncomfortable with being labeled as smart, because when I grew up, that was synonymous with being nerdy, and plus like I just literally don't think of people in terms of IQ. I think there's so many different ways to exhibit genius, whether, that's general intelligence or something else. There's ways to exhibit genius that are not IQ or book smarts, etc. That like the way people overemphasize traditional smarts rubs me the wrong way. But on the other hand, right, I realize like that is part of my value. My ability to conceptualize and model the big picture, right, is what I'm bringing to coaching. And then all of these other things, like I am not going to be a hard-bitten cynic. Like I just couldn't adopt that style. I can be critical, and all of that comes from my intellectual, like this is a critique that doesn't really fit with an accurate model of reality, right, kind of thing. I can lean on that for my critical nature, but ultimately I'm not cynical. I'm not very stoic. I have to, as a coach, constantly work on asking better questions. I feel like I let and encourage people to talk a lot, but like my own tendency to talk means I constantly have to focus on asking more and better questions. So there's ways, like I have to mitigate some of these strong personalities to be a coach. But being a coach is as much, or finding your authentic voice is as much about what you are not as what you are. And one of the signs that someone is moving towards their authentic voice is they start to let go of some of these things. So back in my early 20s at the Crisis Counseling Center, I started to let go of, I started to let go of, certain visions of stereotypical masculinity that I'd been trying to live up to, that I realized like wasn't me. Then, more recently, right, I'm letting go of, trying to be an expert who talks on a particular subject, for instance. That was my previous YouTube channel. I'm letting go because I'm realizing, like, yeah, I do like explaining subjects, but at the end of the day, like, everything I am as, like, a person that lights me up as a coach is really the interaction and, like, helping people not only have epiphanies, but like act on them and change their lives. Like that's what I do. And so these conversations with Meg, bam, they feel authentic in the way the cold emails that I mentioned earlier, or some of the earlier style on my channel really don't feel authentic. And I don't know if you're ever at the road, but like maybe this is more of like a periodic thing, like periodically check in and let go of the things that aren't serving you in your voice so you can spend more time on the things that are. And this has been way too long as it is, so yeah, I guess we're done. All right, if you want to get notifications, you can click the notify me bells and subscribe and like the video, and that'll be helpful. Because I hope these conversations can reach more solopreneurs, help them build their business. And so if you share this video, like, subscribe, etc., that helps. It helps people find this and benefit from this. And I used to sign off my videos saying this, and maybe I will bring that back. But until tomorrow, make big changes, one small habit at a time.